For centuries, the world has been captivated by the tales of Viking men, fierce warriors, master navigators, and legendary raiders. Their exploits shaped the course of history, leaving an indelible mark on Europe and beyond. But beneath the thunder of battle and the glint of swords, beneath the stories of bloodshed, conquest, and exploration, lies another tale, one of quiet strength, resilience, and enduring power. This is the untold story of the Viking women. These women lived in a world defined by both hardship and opportunity, in a culture that offered them freedoms and responsibilities that were rare for their time. They were not merely wives, mothers, or daughters, nor were they passive figures in the background of Viking society. They were warriors who could wield swords, traders who traversed vast distances, settlers who tamed the land, and spiritual leaders who communicated with the divine. Viking women were as essential to the survival and success of their people as the warriors who sailed across oceans and stormed foreign shores. The Viking world was one of extremes, where survival depended on strength, both physical and mental. Harsh winters, unforgiving landscapes, and the constant threat of conflict shaped these women into formidable figures. They thrived in a society where strength was paramount and where they were often called upon to make decisions that would determine the fate of their families and communities. In their hands, they held the keys to survival, growth, and prosperity. But their legacy has long been overshadowed by the larger-than-life stories of Viking men. As the warriors' tales of conquest and adventure filled the pages of history, the quiet power of the women was pushed into the margins. And yet, it was these women, these quiet pillars of society, who often ensured the continued existence of the Viking world. They shaped the destinies of their people, making critical decisions in the absence of their husbands and sons, who were often away on long voyages for trade or war. They fought for their survival, not always with sword and shield, but with resilience, wisdom, and an unbreakable spirit. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th century to the 11th century, was an era of great transformation. Scandinavian societies, once isolated by geography and climate, began to expand outward in search of opportunity, riches, and new lands. It was a time of both exploration and conquest. Viking men, with their longships cutting through the frothy waves of the North Sea, embarked on legendary raids that struck fear across Europe. Their journeys took them to places as far as North Africa, Byzantium, and even North America. But behind these seafaring warriors stood another force, one that commanded not with swords, but with endurance, skill, and leadership. These were the Viking women. Viking women were not mere bystanders to history. While the men ventured into unknown waters, women were left behind not in idleness, but in command. They shouldered the responsibility of running entire estates, farms, and communities. In a world where survival was often precarious, Viking women were essential to the very fabric of society. Their lives were ones of labor, leadership, and resilience, shaped by the unforgiving landscape of Scandinavia. To truly understand these women, one must first understand the land they called home. The Scandinavian climate was harsh and unpredictable, with long, bitter winters and a rugged terrain that resisted cultivation. In this environment, every person, man or woman, had to contribute to the survival of the household. The physical demands of life were immense, requiring both ingenuity and endurance. Women, like men, were expected to work the fields, tend the animals, and prepare food for the long winters. They were also responsible for managing the household, a role that carried great significance in Viking culture. Unlike many other societies of their time, Viking women held unique legal rights that granted them a measure of independence and authority. They could inherit property, file for divorce, and reclaim their dowries upon the death of their husbands or the dissolution of a marriage. In a world where women in most parts of Europe were considered little more than the property of men, Viking women had the ability to manage wealth, make contracts, and even bring legal cases to court. They were respected members of their households, working side by side with men in every aspect of daily life. In the absence of their husbands, who often spent months, even years, away on voyages of exploration or raids, women were left in charge of the estate. They ran the farms, oversaw the harvests, and ensured that the household continued to function. This responsibility wasn't simply domestic, it was essential to the survival of the entire community. The strength of Viking women extended beyond the fields and farms. They were also shrewd traders and negotiators, deeply involved in the economic lifeblood of their communities. Viking society was interconnected with trade routes that stretched from the British Isles to the far reaches of the Middle East. Ships carried goods across the seas, amber, furs, iron, and textiles, and it was often the women who managed the distribution of these resources while the men were away. These markets were vibrant centers of commerce where women played a pivotal role. They haggled for goods, oversaw the exchange of precious items, and ensured the prosperity of their families. Viking women were far from the secluded figures seen in many contemporary societies. They traveled with their husbands to distant lands and sometimes even led settlements themselves. One of the most famous examples of this is Aud the Deep-Minded, a woman whose name still resonates through the sagas. Aud the Deep-Minded's story is one of resilience, leadership, and vision. After the death of her husband, a Norse king, Aud did not retreat into a quiet life of mourning. Instead, she took command of her family's fate. She gathered her kin, organized a fleet, and set out on a perilous journey across the North Atlantic. Her destination was the newly discovered land of Iceland, a place untamed and wild, but full of promise. The voyage was fraught with danger. The waters of the North Atlantic were notoriously treacherous, plagued by storms, freezing temperatures, and rocky coastlines. Many ships had been lost to the sea, claimed by the cold depths. But Aud's leadership never wavered. She navigated her fleet through the icy waters, her eyes always on the horizon, her determination unshakable. When Aud arrived on the shores of Iceland, she did more than just settle the land. She claimed it. In a time when women were often seen as second to men, Aud's claim to land was a bold and revolutionary act. She became one of Iceland's first settlers and a matriarch whose descendants would shape the future of the island for generations. Aud's story is not just one of survival, it is a testament to the power and influence Viking women could wield, especially in times of great upheaval. Her journey was one of leadership, vision, and courage, and she remains a symbol of the strength and independence that defined Viking women. The Viking Age was not only a time of exploration and trade, it was also an era defined by war. The saga's epic stories passed down through generations speak of legendary battles and fearless warriors, whose feats shaped the history and mythology of the Norse world. Among these warriors stood the shield maidens, women who fought with the same strength and ferocity as their male counterparts. Though their existence was long debated, the shield maidens were not merely characters of legend, they were real, formidable figures whose presence has been confirmed by modern archaeology. The stories of these warrior women are woven into the fabric of Viking culture, told and retold through sagas that have survived to this day. One of the most famous shield maidens was Lagertha, a figure whose name still echoes in the halls of Viking history. According to the sagas, Lagertha was not just an equal to the men she fought beside, she was their superior in skill and bravery. Described as having the heart of a lion, Lagertha led her warriors into battle time and time again, securing victory against overwhelming odds. Though the stories of Lagertha are filled with heroism and bravery, they were once thought to be merely mythological tales of a time when gods and giants walked the earth. But modern discoveries have brought these stories closer to historical reality. Archaeologists, through years of research and excavation, have begun to uncover evidence that suggests these warrior women were not just fantasy, but real participants in Viking warfare. In 2017, a groundbreaking discovery was made in Birka, Sweden, an ancient trading post that was once a bustling hub of Viking activity. Buried deep within the earth, archaeologists uncovered a grave unlike any other. Inside, they found the remains of a high-ranking warrior, surrounded by a full array of weapons, swords, axes, arrows, and even 2 horses, placed carefully to accompany the warrior into the afterlife. The lavishness of the grave and the status of the warrior's burial left no doubt this was a person of immense importance. For over a century, scholars assumed that such a grave must belong to a man. After all, the warrior's status, the sheer amount of weaponry, and the ritual burial with horses all pointed to a great male leader. But DNA analysis would reveal a stunning truth: the warrior buried in this honored grave was not a man, but a woman. This discovery sent shockwaves through the historical and archaeological communities. It shattered long-held assumptions about Viking society and forced a reevaluation of the roles women played in it. The woman buried in Birka was not just any warrior, she was a high-ranking leader, likely involved in both strategy and combat. This finding confirmed what the sagas had long suggested: Viking women were not only capable of fighting alongside men, they could also rise to positions of leadership, commanding troops and earning the same respect as their male counterparts. The shield maiden, once thought to be nothing more than a mythological figure, now stands on firmer ground. The discovery in Birka has given new weight to the stories of women who took up arms in defense of their people. These women, whether by choice or necessity, stepped into roles traditionally held by men. They fought with the same ferocity, the same skill, and the same courage as any Viking warrior. But Viking women did not only leave their mark on history through battle. They were also key figures in the spiritual and political life of the Viking world. In Norse society, women often held positions of spiritual authority, guiding their people through rituals and ceremonies that connected them to the gods. These women, known as Volva or Seeresses, were revered for their ability to communicate with the divine, foretell the future, and influence the outcome of battles. the Volva held great power in Viking society, not through physical strength, but through their connection to the gods and the forces of fate. These women could be found advising kings and chieftains, their visions guiding the decisions of warriors and rulers. The sagas tell of Volva who could shape the very course of a battle with their prophecies, and their influence was deeply respected. In Viking society, power came in many forms. While some women wielded swords and shields, others wielded knowledge and prophecy. Together, these women, whether warriors or seeresses, played a crucial role in shaping the Viking world. Their stories, once dismissed as myth, are now being uncovered through the work of historians and archaeologists, revealing a truth that has long been hidden. Viking women were far more than the silent figures of history. They were leaders, fighters, and spiritual guides. The Vikings were a people deeply connected to the unseen forces of the world. Their lives were governed not only by the strength of their swords, but by the will of the gods, the movements of the stars, and the whispers of fate. They believed that the world was shaped by forces beyond mortal control, forces that could be understood and even influenced by those who had the knowledge and power to do so. At the heart of this spiritual life were the women who held the secrets of the divine. They were the Volva, the seeresses, priestesses, and healers who could communicate with the gods and shape the future. The Volva were the spiritual leaders of Viking society, wielding powers that were both revered and feared. These women practiced cider, a form of Norse magic that allowed them to commune with the gods, interpret omens, and influence the outcomes of battles and voyages. Cider was not merely a set of rituals, it was a way of tapping into the threads of fate itself. The Volva could see what others could not, visions of the past, present, and future, and the paths that led to victory or ruin. The Volva held immense power in Viking society, not through physical strength, but through their ability to access the divine. Kings and chieftains would often seek their counsel, trusting their visions to guide decisions in times of war, famine, and uncertainty. Their prophecies could change the course of history, and their words carried the weight of the gods themselves. One of the most famous stories of a Volva comes from the sagas, the tale of the Volva in Erik the Red's saga. In the cold and harsh lands of Greenland, the settlers faced an uncertain future. They called upon a powerful Volva to predict their fate, hoping that her connection to the gods would offer them clarity and guidance. In Erik the Red's saga, the Volva was called upon to predict the future of the settlers in Greenland, a land as harsh and unforgiving as the fates themselves. She was brought into the longhouse and given great respect, seated in a high seat draped in animal skins. As she performed her ritual, the settlers waited anxiously, knowing that her vision could mean the difference between survival and death. Her words would carry the weight of the gods, and they knew that to ignore them would be to invite disaster. The Volva's connection to the gods was not taken lightly. Her prophecies, once spoken, could not be undone. Whether predicting the outcome of battles, the success of a voyage, or the fate of a community, her words held tremendous power. She wielded knowledge that kings coveted and warriors feared. In the Viking world, where the line between the natural and the supernatural was often blurred, the Volva were seen as gatekeepers of a deeper truth. The Volva's influence extended far beyond the borders of their villages. They were often summoned by kings and chieftains to offer guidance in matters of war and governance. In these moments, the Volva were more than just seers, they were trusted advisors, whose knowledge of the gods' will could determine the fate of entire kingdoms. Their connection to the divine gave them a unique authority in Viking society, one that kings dared not ignore. These women wielded their spiritual power with authority, and they were both respected and feared. To have the favor of the gods was a gift, but it came with a heavy burden. The Volva's knowledge of the runes, the ancient spells, and the will of the gods gave them a special place in Viking society, where they stood at the crossroads of the human and the divine. In many ways, the Volva were the keepers of the Viking people's spiritual well-being. They knew the ancient rituals that connected their people to the gods and the forces of nature. Through their ceremonies, they ensured that the favor of the gods was maintained, that battles were fought under the right signs, and that the cycles of the seasons continued in harmony. The power of the Volva was not confined to the halls of kings or the fires of battle. It extended into the natural world, into the forests, the fields, and the seas. They were the intermediaries between humanity and the forces that shaped their world, forces of creation, destruction, and renewal. Through their magic, their knowledge of the runes, and their communion with the gods, they shaped the fate of their people. And in doing so, they left an indelible mark on the Viking world, a mark that has endured through the centuries. For all the dramatic tales of warriors, raiders, and gods, the heartbeat of Viking society pulsed within the village, within the walls of the home, where Viking women played a role just as critical as any hero on the battlefield. These women were the foundation upon which their communities were built. Without their tireless work, Viking society could not have thrived. Their responsibilities were vast. Viking women managed the farms, tilled the soil, and cared for the livestock, ensuring that their families had enough food to survive the long, brutal winters. They also maintained the hearth, which symbolized the heart of the household, keeping the fire burning through the cold, dark nights. Beyond this, they were skilled artisans, creating the textiles that clothed their families and provided an essential source of trade goods. The woolen cloth, linens, and tapestries they wove were not just used locally, they were prized across Europe for their craftsmanship, fetching high prices in foreign markets. Viking women were not confined to their homes. Many were deeply involved in trade, managing the exchange of goods that traveled across vast distances from the bustling markets of Scandinavia to the glittering courts of Byzantium. The textiles they produced were highly sought after, not only for their quality but for their beauty. Viking society thrived on trade, and women were an essential part of this economic network, negotiating deals, overseeing production, and ensuring that their families and communities prospered. But the influence of Viking women went far beyond the marketplace. They played a crucial role in maintaining the social fabric of their communities. In a world where alliances were often forged through marriage, Viking women were the architects of these unions. They were responsible for arranging marriages that would strengthen ties between powerful families, ensuring the security and prosperity of their clan. These marriages were not just personal unions, they were political strategies, carefully negotiated to build alliances, settle disputes, and prevent conflict. In this way, Viking women acted as diplomats and negotiators, carefully balancing the needs of their family with the complex web of political alliances that stretched across the Viking world. The feast was not simply a celebration. It was a political stage upon which the fate of families, communities, and even kingdoms could be decided. Viking women, though often behind the scenes, were the orchestrators of these gatherings. They managed every detail, ensuring that the food, drink, and hospitality were worthy of the status of their guests. These gatherings were opportunities to strengthen alliances, negotiate treaties, and resolve disputes. In this way, Viking women were essential to the political landscape, shaping the course of events with their careful planning and leadership. Though their contributions often went unnoticed by the chroniclers of the time, the influence of Viking women on the political landscape cannot be underestimated. Women like Aud the Deep-Minded, who led her family across the seas to settle in Iceland, were not isolated figures. Across the Viking world, women were deeply involved in the politics of their time, whether by leading settlements, negotiating treaties, or managing the intricate web of alliances that bound Viking families together. Aud's journey to Iceland is a powerful example of how Viking women were active participants in shaping the future of their people. After the death of her husband, she took charge of her family's fate, organizing a fleet and leading them across the treacherous North Atlantic to a new land. In Iceland, she claimed land, established a prosperous settlement, and ensured the survival of her descendants for generations. Her leadership and determination are a testament to the strength and resilience of Viking women. But Aud was not the only woman to shape the future of the Viking world. Across Scandinavia, women played key roles in the establishment and governance of new settlements, often taking on leadership positions in times of great upheaval. They were not just passive witnesses to history. They were active participants who shaped the course of events, often in ways that went unnoticed by the chroniclers of their time. It was in these villages, in the farms and homes, in the feasts and markets, that Viking women left their most enduring mark. They were the builders of society, the weavers of alliances, the keepers of the hearth. Their hands shaped the very fabric of Viking life, and their influence, though often hidden from the pages of history, was profound. Without them, the Viking world as we know it would not have existed. Today, the legacy of Viking women is being uncovered piece by piece. After centuries of being overshadowed by the tales of Viking men, the women of the Viking Age are finally stepping out of the shadows. Archaeologists continue to make discoveries that challenge long-held assumptions about the roles these women played in their society. What was once thought to be myth is now being confirmed through the careful examination of bones, artifacts, and the sagas that have been passed down through generations. The relics found in Viking women's graves tell a story of power, agency, and skill. These graves contain not just the domestic items one might expect, but swords, axes, and shields, evidence that some Viking women fought alongside men or commanded forces of their own. In Birka, Sweden, the discovery of a high-ranking female warrior's grave, complete with weapons and armor, has forced historians to reevaluate long-held assumptions about the division of roles between men and women in Viking society. These women were more than just caretakers of the hearth. They were warriors, merchants, and spiritual leaders, shaping their world in ways that had long gone unrecognized. As the sagas resurface and the bones are analyzed, a fuller picture of Viking society emerges, one in which women held power, influence, and control. Each new discovery offers a window into the lives of Viking women who were long forgotten by history. These artifacts, buried for centuries, are now revealing the stories of women who defied the expectations of their time. From warrior graves to the personal belongings of priestesses, these finds challenge the narrative that Viking women were confined to domestic roles. They show us that these women were leaders, not only in the home but on the battlefield, in the marketplace, and in spiritual life. The sagas, once dismissed as mere myth, now offer glimpses into a world where women could rise to great heights of power and influence. The stories of Lagertha, Aud the Deep-Minded, and countless other women were once thought to be exaggerated or symbolic. Yet, as archaeological evidence continues to surface, these stories are being re-examined. The warrior women of Viking lore were not only figures of legend, they were real, flesh and blood individuals whose actions shaped the course of Viking history. But beyond the sagas, beyond the bones and the artifacts, the true legacy of Viking women lies in their resilience, their strength, and their ability to shape the world around them. These women lived in a time of immense hardship, an era of brutal winters, constant warfare, and dangerous sea voyages. Yet they thrived, carving out a place for themselves in a world that demanded toughness, both of body and spirit. The legacy of Viking women is not just a part of the distant past. It lives on in the hearts of modern-day Scandinavians, who continue to honor the spirit of their foremothers. These women, who endured so much and achieved so greatly, have become symbols of resilience, strength, and independence. Their stories inspire a new generation, one that seeks to reclaim the narratives that were lost to time. Their story, once untold, is now coming to light. The Viking women were more than just the silent figures behind their men. They were warriors, settlers, traders, and leaders. They were the heart and soul of Viking society, and their legacy lives on not just in history, but in the world they helped to build. Though centuries have passed, the echoes of their lives can still be heard in the lands they once walked, in the ships that crossed the seas they once sailed, and in the stories they left behind. The Viking women's legacy is one of strength, courage, and unyielding determination. It is a legacy that continues to inspire, even as it is being rediscovered piece by piece.